All right, I think everyone is in from the waiting room, so whenever you're ready, Nick.
All right. Thanks, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining this unique and awesome session that we put together on behalf of the Baltimore CFA Society with Wentworth Financial Communications. Before I jump in and introduce our speaker today and the session, just a couple housekeeping items on the front end. For those of you I don't know, Nick Shepard obviously run programming for the committee and appreciate everyone's ongoing support and attendance at all of our events. A few really awesome events upcoming in November, December, and January to mark your calendar today. You should have received an email from the Society over the course of the last few weeks regarding the Thursday, November 20th session with Tom Barkin. That's always a fantastic session with a Federal Reserve governor, and Tom is fantastic with his remarks and obviously spending a lot of time with us in terms of Q&A, and our members take great advantage of that. Second, December 11th, mark your calendar for our year-end holiday happy hour at the Larendale Club. We'll be returning to Larendale this year. We received great feedback regarding the location, the event space, and just the optionality to do more out in the county with our membership base. Last, be on the lookout in the near future for annual forecasting. Save the date. We're still working on finalizing speakers, but we have a very nice repository of keynote speakers that we're working through now and think it will be a fantastic session yet again this year. So that's it for housekeeping. Before I turn it over to Scott Wentworth, who is the founder and CEO of Wentworth Financial Communications, maybe just an endorsement for the session today. At my employer, T. Rowe Price, we have a really large research platform and an embedded in-house communication team. We often say that it's one thing to get the stock or credit right in terms of your rating, but if you're not able to communicate that to portfolio managers and decision makers to drive alpha for clients and drive results, it ultimately does not mean a thing. So we're excited about this session. Scott, thanks for the time, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Nick. It's great to be here. And Nick, I think that's the perfect intro, because that's sort of what you described as the essence of why I think this presentation matters and why I think it's helpful. Like we said, in the investment world, the ideas that we communicate often aren't all that sort of, or they're complex and they're abstract, and sometimes they're not all that interesting. And so it's one thing to be right, but it's a different thing to persuade people that you're right. And so hopefully some of the tips I can provide today are helpful in empowering you to do that in your careers. A little bit of background about myself. So I founded the company more than a decade ago and started my career at William Blair, which is an asset management and investment banking firm based in Chicago. And when I was working there, I worked in the marketing department and realized that there was more of a need for writing, and writing was becoming a bigger part of how the uh, asset management and investment world shared their information. And so that gave me the idea to start a firm that does this on an outsourced basis for financial services firms. And asset managers make up about 70% of our revenue. The rest is split amongst investment banks, wealth managers, private equity, and some consulting or investment consulting firms. So the sorts of things that companies bring us in to do are everything from pure thought leadership is probably the easiest thing to understand. So white papers, ebooks, that sort of thing, product content, and then even kind of strategic messaging. How do we talk about this fund, or how do we talk about our platform? And as you can imagine, a lot of the work we've done in the last 2 years has been about private markets and specifically bringing private markets into the wealth channel. I'm sure a lot of your firms, that's been a big push and lots of attention around that. So, and the reason I say that, just to give you an idea of like kind of how we encounter and the types of writing that we do. The writing that we do is marketing writing that ends up on websites or newsletters or social media, those sorts of things. We don't really do the kind of the internal memos or sort of investor relations type writing, but a lot of the lessons that I'll talk about today apply regardless of what the format is or what audience you're talking to. So with that, I'm excited to dive in, and like Nick said in the chat, the presentation will probably last around 30, 35 minutes or so. And then after that, I will open it up to questions and we can kind of circle back on some of the things that I brought up today. All right. Just first of all, can I get a confirmation, Robin or Nick, thumbs up that, or let me know if you cannot see my screen, if there's any issues with the sharing.
We can see it. You're good.
Excellent. I will proceed. All right. Writing is a notoriously hard thing, and when I tell people that I write for a living, I hear a lot of reasons. Or people say, "Oh, I'm not a good writer, and I just can't get better." And I think there's kind of two main reasons why people tend to resist improving their writing. One is they view themselves as it's a quantitative view. People say, "I'm a numbers person. I'm not a words person." So I hear that a lot. I also hear this nature over nurture argument, meaning that people say writing is an innate skill. You either have it or you don't. And I view that I understand both of these perspectives, but I want to encourage everyone to kind of overcome these things. And, for the quant person on the left, I tell them, yeah, you may be a numbers person and you may have a kind of a proclivity for talking in quantitative things and talking about numbers, but we live in a world that is both numbers and words. You don't get to pick one or the other. We have to communicate and be able to understand both. So we don't get to say, well, just because I'm not a words person, I don't have to be good with words. The world doesn't work that way. And then on the right, the nature over nurture view. Yes, I agree that writing, to a degree, is an innate skill. And like any form of art, people have natural abilities or kind of baseline skills that they're either born with or kind of develop over time. But like any skill, whether it's golf or painting or uh, reading or poetry or whatever it is, the more that you can, whatever your baseline is, you can enhance and refine that skill and improve it 10, 20, 30%. So wherever you're at, whether you're naturally good at it or you're naturally, it's a struggle for you, you can always get better. And that improving on the margins is what I think a lot of the tips I'll give you today will be sort of structures and techniques you can use to take wherever you're at your baseline and get better. All right. A concept we all know in the investment world is ROI. So that's your gains and dividends over the investment. I think a useful construct for today's presentation is to think about your return on writing. So that your ROW is the quality and impact of your writing divided by the time and the energy that you put into it. The tips I'll give you today are designed to improve both the numerator and the denominator, meaning how hopefully by following this process and these guidelines, you can have more interesting, more impactful, memorable writing, and then convert or at the same time spend less time and energy to deliver that. So, or even if you affect one or either one of those, still it enhances the ROW. So how do you do this? I'm going to go through 6 main ideas to help you think about ways to make either improve the quality of your writing or spend less time doing it. All right, getting into the first one, the 4 Ps. I think in the investment world, everyone knows what the 4 Ps are when you're evaluating an investment manager. It's performance, philosophy, people, and of course, process. Just like any portfolio manager or analyst is going to have a process for how they evaluate investments and how they build portfolios. As a writer, I think we need to have a process as well. So my first and overriding piece of advice is to have a process and trust your process when it comes to writing. And there's different ways, or I think a lot of times when people think about writing, they think of the process of writing as kind of a one-step thing, meaning, okay, I have to write this email or I have to write this memo or this research report. So the process is me sitting down and I'm going to sit down and write it. That's a very simplified way, but I think unfortunately a lot of people actually act that way. The correct way to think about writing is in fact know that it's one big thing that's made up of several discrete steps. So brainstorming, research, outline, writing, and then editing. So by thinking about writing in rather than a kind of one big step and breaking it down into its parts, several benefits to this. A, it allows you to focus your mental energy on on something narrower rather than trying to do all these things at once. So that's, it helps overcome writer's block and it helps you be more creative and be more insightful. So again, I think when you think about writing, have a process and realize that there's lots of distinct steps. And we'll walk through each of those steps. So first of all, brainstorming. That involves just sitting down and getting your ideas on paper. So before I start writing anything, even before I've done the research, I sit down and think, okay, what are some possible angles? What are things that come to my mind when I think about this topic? What are things I generally want to convey? And start identifying themes. In this brainstorming process, I really like to do it the analog way with just a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and a pen or a pencil. I find that my brain works a lot better when I'm not staring at a computer screen or my hands aren't at a keyboard. So a lot of times I'll move away from the computer and just start, like a scratch sheet of paper and just start scribbling out ideas. I find that that helps me be more creative. Then after that, I go into the research part of it. In my world, that involves interviewing portfolio managers or analysts or bankers, or it can be doing research on Bloomberg or research on publicly available information, looking at competitors' websites, etc. I do the work to kind of get all the nuggets that I'll need to put the story together. And when I'm researching, I can start sort of separating the wheat from the chaff from the brainstorming session because there could be some ideas that I put on the paper when I was brainstorming that really, once I start doing the research, don't hold muster or maybe get contradicted by some of the facts or outdated. And so it allows me to sort of think about these ideas that I thought might be interesting, kind of validate whether they are in fact valid. And also, doing the research at this stage helps prevent writer's block or preempt it. And the reason, what I mean by that is, I think a lot of people have writer's block because they sit down, they start writing, and they get to a sentence where they need to, for example, quote, credit spreads from the last 10 years. And it's like, okay, well, then I'm going to go to the Bloomberg terminal, find that information, and come back and put it in the paper. But if you're doing that, you're sort of taking yourself away from the writing process into the research and back to writing. And I think that causes our brains to sort of malfunction or not work as efficiently as they can. So when I sit down to write, I want to make sure I have all the things that I need at my fingertips already, so I can easily incorporate them. All right, a famous quote from Thomas Edison that says, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." I sort of co-opted this quote and said that I think writing is 99% inspiration and 90 or 1% inspiration and 99% organization. What I mean by this is that a lot of people think that writing is all about these great soaring ideas and being able to put them together very eloquently in a very concise, compelling way. And while that's true, and that's certainly an element of it, I'd say that the number one defining characteristic of good writing and good writers is organization. Uh, I believe that when you're writing, especially anything technical and complex that needs to be explained, the unifying characteristic of it is that it's well organized and clear. And so that's why I say that the most important part of the writing process is outlining. I tell people that this is where we make our money is on the outline stage. It's not putting meat on the bones, it's building the skeleton that really matters. Or use another analogy, the outline is where you create the blueprint for the house. And the writing is just when you decorate or kind of finish off the walls and decorate it. And the outlining is really what makes it work. This is where you organize your ideas. In the outline, it's really important to think about transitions. So it's one thing to have point A, B, and C, but as the writer, I want to think about how do I transition to A and B even before I sit down and start fleshing it out, because the relationship of A and B and then B to C is what matters, is the essence of the story. And so I don't want to treat those transitions as an afterthought and try to make them up as I go when I start writing. And the outlining also helps me avoid this phenomenon called note dumping. So note dumping is where you've done all your research, you have all this information, you kind of fall in love with what you found. And so you try to make sure you cram everything that you found into the paper. The outline allows you to say, okay, which facts and which anecdotes are necessary to make this point, and those are the ones I'm going to put in. And a lot of times, especially in more technical writing in the investment industry, they fall down because there's too much information in it. They try to cram too many details and too many facts into their point. And the thing you want to ask yourself is, the question is, what's the right amount of detail to include to prove your point? The answer is the least amount necessary, because you don't have your audience's attention for nearly as long as you think you do. So by being very selective and concise in what you put in, it allows you to focus your reader's attention on the most important part. So again, don't just because you have facts at your disposal doesn't mean they should go in. And the real test is this fact essential? And if not, leave it out. All right. And I like to tell people again that great writers are good outliners. Okay. This is a picture of a famous movie character. And if you're my age, I'm in my mid 40s. And so I'm sure you know who this is if you're about my age. This is Chunk from the movie Goonies. And you may wonder, like, well, why are we talking about Chunk? What does he have to do with the writing process or writing portfolio reports or investment commentaries? And I tell people that you want to get chunky with your time when it comes to writing. So what I mean by that is writing is not something that you can do 15 minutes at a time, 30 minutes here, 40 minutes there, 15 minutes here. You need to block off big chunks of time to be efficient as a writer. Writing is something that requires a lot of thought, a lot of creativity. And if you're trying to cram it in between things, your brain isn't going to be able to get into that flow state that you need to write well. So when you're in that state, you want to really orient your mind for deep focus and deep work. So you want to eliminate distractions. I mean, if you turn off your phone, close out your email. Even more importantly, if you can get out of your office or get to a spot where people aren't going to be walking into your office or bothering you, even better. For example, I like to go to a coffee shop a lot of times because I know I'm not going to be distracted by people needing me or the phone ringing there. So anything you can do to eliminate distractions, because what we want to do as a writer is to create a scenario where we can sit down and spend 2 hours at a time focusing on this and not be trying to come in and out of it all the time. And then finally, once you've created this environment, you got to just sit down and pull the trigger. As writers, I think a lot of writer's block happens because we hem and haw and try to find the perfect way to word something or the perfect way to write, convey an idea or structure something. But eventually there comes a point where we've done the work, we've got ourselves ready, we have to trust ourselves and pull the trigger and just go. And then finally, the last step is editing. And this is something I like to show to kind of emphasize the importance of having someone else look at your work when you're writing, because the human brain can play tricks on us. So according to according to a research study at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and the last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. So I include this fun kind of exercise to show you that as an editor, or to reinforce the idea, or here's a second one, after reading this sentence, you're not aware that the human brain repeats the word the every time in this sentence. So both of these things, I include them to show you that your brain can skip steps and your brain can work ahead. And this is not a great trait for an editor because if you've been sitting down and writing something for a long time and then you immediately try to look back and edit it, your brain will start playing tricks on you and sort of assume things that are there that aren't, or vice versa. So from an editing perspective, if you can have someone else on your team proofread or not just proofread, but edit what you said, that's the ideal state. You want a second set of eyes on it and ask them, okay, here's the main point I'm trying to convey. What did you take away as the main point? But if you have to edit your own thing, it's really important to give yourself a mental break. So for example, if I'm sitting down and writing a paper for 2 hours or a memo, okay, I'm done, I'm ready to send it. I don't want to edit it right there on the spot because my brain is so into the moment there that it's hard for me to get away from that. And my brain is kind of connecting connecting the dots and filling any gaps that may be there. So what I like to do is in a scenario where I can't have someone else edit it, I will literally leave the room, go around and take a walk around the block just to give myself a reset mentally, get some fresh air, and then come back and sit down at my piece and look at it again. And normally when I do that, I find ways to make it better, make it shorter, and really just improve the writing of it by removing my eyes from it and taking a new look at it. And then finally, it's valuable to read it out loud. May not be feasible if it's a really long piece, but when you're reading something, you can hear things, you can hear flow, you can catch mistakes, you can catch awkward phrasing that you may not find when your eyes are looking at it. Because as we saw on the previous screens, our eyes will skip steps on us. All right, so just to recap, when we think about the writing process, the wrong way to think about the writing process is a one-step thing where it's just all writing. The right way to think about it is 5 discrete steps. We're going to do these in order, and we're going to have this process that we follow. And even if it's something as short as an email, even going through these steps, even if they just take a minute or 2 minutes of time each step, it's still valuable to kind of train yourself to stay in that process and follow it. And there's certainly people who have different processes, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but I think the main takeaway is find a process that works for yourself and follow it, and trust the process and lean into that, and that'll improve the quality and the impact of your writing. All right, so that's our first, and I think most important recommendation is to trust the process. Secondly, we want to figure out how do we tell our alpha story. And as we talked about at the beginning, it's one thing to have an investment idea and be right, but convincing someone that you're right and getting there is one thing. But even beyond that, getting their attention and getting them to care that you're right or wrong is perhaps the most important thing. So, Wizard of Oz. Some of you may know this, but the movie came out in the 30s, but the book came out in the late 1800s or early 1900s, written by Frank Baum, and it was written as an allegory to explain some of the monetary issues facing the United States at the time. So farmers were in debt. They wanted the populace wanted to inflate away debt to help out the farmers. And so Frank Baum was sympathetic to that. So he wrote this book where all these characters, these bizarre characters, represented different politicians and ideas from the time. And in the book, and in the movie, the characters are told to follow the yellow brick road to get where they want to go. And so that's the gold standard. The road represents the gold standard. But they follow the yellow brick road. There's people at the end of it, the wizard who doesn't really know what he's doing. So it's meant to sort of teach them following gold isn't going to get you where you need to go. And it's not until Dorothy clicks her slippers that she's able to get home and get where she needs to go. Now, in the movie, her slippers are ruby colored, but in the book, these slippers are silver. So that was Frank Baum's way of saying, hey, we need to increase inflation or devalue the dollar, add silver back the dollar by silver in addition to gold, the gold standard. So silver is really what's going to get us where we need to go. But for the sake of the movies, it was a Technicolor or black and white and Technicolor movie. Silver wouldn't have shown up very well, so they made her slippers ruby colored instead of silver. Some of you may know that, but I think it's a very interesting factoid. But why do I bring it up? Well, I bring it up because I'm guessing if you don't, that may be one of the memorable things you hear me say all day, you take from this presentation. And the reason is because I took a story, I use an anecdote, I use imagery to make it come to life, much more memorable, much more interesting than just me talking about the need to use these things in the abstract. And also Frank Baum, as the writer, he knew that talking about monetary policy and politics were sort of complex, abstract ideas. So he needed to find some way to connect it to something tangible, something more interesting. So as writers, I don't suggest that we need to go that far in creating analogies to make our points about our investment thesis. But we do want to use techniques that make it more interesting than just saying, here are the facts. These facts should speak for themselves. So whether those are analogies or anecdotes, think about elements of storytelling where you sort of create conflict at the front and then resolve that conflict. Finding ways to use unconventional words. In the investment industry, it's a very jargon-heavy industry, and it's easy and kind of lazy to just rely on the words that everyone knows. And in fact, there's benefit to doing these words that everyone knows the meaning of. However, when we do that, it allows the reader to sort of shut off and it doesn't catch the reader's attention. So if you can find new phrases or new ways to convey ideas that are well known by everyone else, you can grab their attention and show them that you have new thinking that you're bringing to this. All right, the third point, and this is probably the simplest to understand and maybe the most impactful, is don't bury the lead. In our work, we get drafts from our clients' investment teams all the time. And I can't tell you how many times I've been reading a white paper and I get to page 3, and then finally, somewhere in the middle of page 3, I find out the most compelling or kind of the main takeaway of what the point they're trying to make, buried in the middle of page 3. So I had to read through, spend 10 minutes reading about stuff as setup just to get to the main point. And this is a very common mistake that writers make, is that they don't put the most important main takeaway at front and center and kind of hit the reader right in the nose with it right off the bat. A good way I went to journalism school, and I remember we were taught this and it applies to marketing writing as well. So a lawyer is taught to write fact, 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 and then the conclusion. When they're writing their legal briefs, they lay out the fact pattern, the case law, and then say, okay, because of all these things, here's the conclusion. A journalist, on the other hand, is taught to write conclusion, the lead, the first sentence or two of the article, and then fact, 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 fact. So in our writing, I firmly believe that we should all try to be more like journalists as we write, whether we're portfolio managers or bankers or even marketing at investment firms. The journalistic way of writing is much more compelling and more interesting because it answers the most important question right off the bat and is like, why should I care? And so by saying, here's what happened and here's why you should care right off the bat, then you can lay out the facts later on about that. But don't be like the lawyer. Don't lay out, okay, here's all the background, here's what's happened in markets, here's the changes in tax laws, et cetera. And because of all that, here's what you should do. Instead, right, here's the takeaway, here's what we think about the stock, here's what we think about this investment opportunity, and then lay out, here's the reasons for that. All right, number 4, overcome the curse of knowledge. Stephen A. Pinker, who's a professor at Harvard, he says that the curse of knowledge is the chief contributor to opaque writing. And what he means by that is, as the expert on something, or as the writer, I've sat down, I've done all this research, I know all these things, or as a portfolio manager who's writing about kind of why we picked a stock or why we made this decision, we've been thinking about these things for years, perhaps, or weeks or days. And so once we learn something, it's hard to unlearn it. And as writers, that's problematic because as a writer, we're writing for people who don't know what we know. If people already knew what we knew, then there'd be no point in writing about it. They wouldn't need our writing. So the fact that we can't unlearn something is a problem as a writer. So what can we do about it? I'm sorry, skipped ahead. So one thing, how do we attack this curse of knowledge? Well, one thing is to really check yourself and say, okay, am I making assumptions that only an expert would know, or only someone who knows what I know already would be able to connect those dots and make those leaps? So what we want you to do is be empathetic, put yourself in the reader's shoes, think about, well, why should they care and what do they not know about this? And that's how you should orient your writing. Which leads us to our 5th point, which is attacking the misconceptions. When we go to write, the point of writing anything isn't to share information. The point is to convince someone of something and grab their attention and convince them why they should care or how they should think differently. But if we just lay facts on them, that's not going to be very interesting. Instead, to my point about being empathetic, we want to meet the writer where they're at and find an angle into the story of why we're advancing the conversation. So what I mean by that is, and a good way to do it is to think about, like, what are the myths and what are the facts about this topic I'm writing about? Let's say you're talking about credit spreads and how they've evolved. Don't just say, okay, here's where they're at now, here's where we think they're going. Start by finding, okay, here's what the common perception of where credit spreads are at now, or how they've changed with interest rates or in different economic conditions. Find the common misconceptions and attack those. Use that as your angle into the story. Or find places where people may know half of the story and use that as your lead into the article to say, hey, you may know half the story, but this other half that you don't know is the part that matters, and here's how it affects you. So again, we want to attack the misconceptions as writers and use that as our angle to get into the story. All right, and the 6th and final tip for enhancing your return on writing is to narrow the scope. So this is a picture of the ocean, and my advice to writers is to don't try to boil it. A very common mistake, after burying the lead, probably the second biggest mistake we see writers make is that they try to cover too much ground in their writing, meaning that they try to make the scope too broad, or they try to be exhaustive in writing about something. And I understand that impulse amongst an investment professional, in that you feel like if you leave out a detail or don't talk about the exception to the exception or every possible permutation, you may feel like, okay, whoever's reading it may find it remiss that I didn't talk about that. But the problem is, by making something that exhaustive, you're pulling the reader's attention away from the main point that you want to make. So by being narrower, it allows you to go deeper and say more interesting things. So when you're thinking about kind of not just what's my angle, but also how broad is it we want to take, I would say that almost always the narrower you make your point, the more you've empowered yourself to be interesting and compelling. All right. So to recap, 6 different ways we think you can enhance your return on writing. So have a process and trust it. Secondly, tell your alpha story. Use analogies. Try to be like Frank Baum and think about his silver slippers for Dorothy. Find interesting ways to make your points come to life. Third, don't bury the lead. Remember, think like a journalist, not a lawyer. Put the most important thing front and center. Number 4, overcome the curse of knowledge. Be empathetic, realize the things that you know your audience does and what they don't know, and live in those gaps. Try to attack those gaps, and then also attack the misconceptions. When you're thinking about your angle, think about what are the things that people get wrong about this, and start your point there. And then finally, narrow the scope and try to be narrow and concise. It allows you to go deeper and say more interesting things. All right. So that brings us to the end. I know we got some time left, so I'm going to open it up to questions here. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we can just have more of a conversation here. But got my contact information. What I'm going to do is afterwards, we have an ebook with that has these slides, but also has a lot of the captions that go along with them. I'm going to send this to Robin, and she can share it with people. So should have told you this on the front end so you weren't furiously taking slides or screen grabs. But we'll send you an ebook that kind of goes deeper into some of these things, and hopefully they can use them for yourself. But with that, I want to see if there's any sort of questions or main things. And I can see the chat now, but let me pull up the chat and see what questions we have coming up here. All right. Okay, Roman writes, would you say that the great story writers make great equity analysts? I would say the reverse is true. I can tell you that's for sure. Like some of the best writers I know are former equity research analysts. In fact, we have a guy on our team, Peter, who started as he worked on the sell side covering the energy industry. And as people who've done that know, like your job is to crank out these research reports. And even when I worked at William Blair, a lot of my job was editing the equity research reports or kind of summarizing them and sending them out. And I was always impressed by how prolific the analysts were. And even reading all those, you can see that the good analysts are good storytellers. Like they understand how to make it interesting, create themes and kind of constructs that are interesting, as opposed to just saying, hey, here's what we think the stock's undervalued or overvalued. So Roman, I can say that in my view, the great equity research analysts and the ones who are winning awards and getting on CNBC were very good at finding ways to tell a story. And so I think those things the converse is probably true as well. All right, Katie asked, any rules of thumb about how much chart contact to include? I think it probably means chart content is my guess. So with charts, I'm glad you brought this up, Katie. The mistake I see the most with charts is they try to include too many things on one chart. Meaning, as a reader, I want to be able to look at that chart and figure out what the main takeaway is really fast. And that gets obscured when you're adding like multiple axes and too many different lines or data points on it. And so the more that you can streamline your chart, the better. Another way to do this, and these aren't exclusive, it's kind of an and, not an or, but we really encourage our team to make a headline and a caption for the chart that works really hard. So you don't want the headline just to be credit spread since 2015. You want the headline to be something about sort of narrowing of credit spreads. Narrowing of credit spreads speaks to new investment opportunities, or whatever it is. You want the headline to say, here is the takeaway from this chart. And then you can add kind of a 1 or 2 sentence caption right below there that says, here is what's going on. Here's the main takeaway from this. And that's really powerful for a couple of reasons. One, it allows, you don't want the numbers and the data just to have to speak for itself, because those, again, when I talk about the curse of knowledge, you as the writer, you put in that chart, you know why you put it in, and you know kind of what the data, what story it's telling, but the reader won't. So you want to connect those dots for the reader and make it very clear, like, here is the headline, here is why this matters. Separately, as people are reviewing your document, whether it's a white paper or a market commentary, they're going to scan it. People don't read linearly. They don't open it up, start at the beginning, and just read all the way through. They're going to look at it and scan it real quickly first to find out, is this something that's worth my time and energy? And when you're looking at a document, what stands out? Well, the things that stand out to your eye are the headline and the visual elements in it. So we try to create visual elements that can stand on their own. We don't want a chart to only make sense if you've read the 5 preceding paragraphs before that chart. We think that the reader should be able to look at that chart by itself and figure out, A, what is the story here, and how does that individual data point story relate to the bigger point we're trying to make. So again, I think the charts are the most important part of most investment writing, and make sure streamline the amount of data, don't overload it, don't try to have too many data points in your chart. And 2, use headlines and captions so that that data doesn't have to live by itself and it can stand alone and tell the story on its own. But great question, Katie. Glad you asked that. Any others? All right. Well, hopefully this is helpful. Okay, Sean's coming in. Let's see. Thank you for sharing your presentation and knowledge. I find these topics useful as a PhD finance candidate. The journalist versus lawyer approach is especially helpful. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to remember. Again, don't bury the lead. Make it very easy for your reader to quickly find out the point you're trying to make. Don't make them work to try to figure out what is the main point of this. Make that, hit them over the head with it right off the bat. All right. Well, if that's all the questions, we can wrap up. I know this is being recorded, and like I said, I will send out an ebook that has the slides plus some color commentary that you can use. So thank you all for the time, and good luck with your writing. And then, like I
Thank you,
said,
Scott.
I know everyone's probably at a different level today of where they're at as a writer, but if we can make ourselves 10, 20, 30% better, that marginal increase can make a big impact in your career and your ability to kind of share your investment ideas with the world.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Great
Have
to
a
see
great
you.
day, everybody. Bye-bye.